Welcome back to the world of Ben Nevis. Are you
Oh,
ready for some Ben Nevis, Joshua?
revisiting the Ben Nevis distillery through our bottlings. I, I'm so excited, right? This is one of those distilleries that I feel proud to say I introduced Jason to this distillery. He maybe not introduced it, but I helped change your mind on Ben Nevis simply because I kept forcing you to drink
And
them.
that is 100% accurate, yes. But it's interesting, right? And I think we've talked about this as independent bottlers. It's easy to believe there are distilleries you don't like.
Yeah.
It's easy to go through two, three, four expressions and say, yeah, that distillery just doesn't work for me. And yet you might still reach a point at which you go, oh, this distillery does work for me. This is an interesting development.
Right, and this is I think your journey isn't too dissimilar from others, right? I feel as if Ben Nevis really gained its footing as a distillery to look out for over COVID. People started discovering some younger,
Mm,
heavily sherried bottlings and then some of the 90s bottlings.
mm.
And then they discovered that Nika, who owns Ben Nevis, put a good deal of their whiskey into bottlings like Nika from the barrel, or at least that's what they
Well,
say. And so, go
and
ahead.
to that very point, right? We put a Ben Nevis into Japan that sold great guns, absolute
Yeah,
great guns,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Through Jess's efforts,
yeah.
like yeah, I did have that question for you. I don't want to derail the conversation, but I had that question for you. We think about Japanese whiskies and we think about the Japanese palate as
Mhm.
being delicate, subtle, understated. Why do you think Ben Nevis as a distillery has resonated with the Japanese palate?
Well, it tends to have a very umami-like character to it, right?
Ah, interesting.
Right, and it's this savory style that I
Mm,
think could go so well with Japanese cuisine, with fish, right? With lighter fish dishes and sushi and teriyaki, things like that,
mm,
where it's not where that salty, umami, earthy characteristic will complement the things that are going on. Like, yes, this is big, but it's complementary. It's
mhm, mm.
offsetting, right? And that's what
That's a
we
great term, complementary.
yeah. And that's what we look for when we look for our own single casks is if you find this one big note of X, right?
Mhm,
You're hoping that within that single cask there's a note of Y to sort of balance it out. And I think when it comes to Ben Nevis, it sort of does that trick because the
mm.
Japanese tend to enjoy drink with food.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think it's ticking that box. But yeah, listen, really quickly before we get into what are the nosing and the tasting notes, I want to give details to this bottling for our viewers. So it's an 11-year-old, and it spent 8 years in a ex-bourbon hogshead, and then 3 years in a first fill Oloroso American oak hogshead, right? So, you know, so it's gonna have a slightly lighter color to it despite the 3 years in sherry simply because it's American oak rather than European or Spanish oak. And you're looking at 56.2% alcohol on this as well.
Which is
So,
actually partly when you were giving your answer there, which I
yep.
enjoyed. I'm also thinking, what if you took this down to 48%, 46, 43, 40, right?
Mhm.
What would Ben Nevis look like at those strengths? I'm back again to your word complementary in terms of food pairings. Yeah, really
Yeah.
interesting. Quick note for me, nose and into the palate is peaches. I'm just sitting here thinking peaches,
Oh, yeah.
white peaches
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah, it's funny. You get the peaches, I get that sort of, like, tart, plummy kinda quality to it, and a little nuttiness, right? A little sort of like walnut skin or
Well,
yeah.
and in selection, talking about
Hmm.
like a sparkling cider, sparkling alcoholic
Oh,
cider,
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
kind of experience here as well. So such fruit with cereal going on around it.
Right, which again is one of the reasons we decided to release this whiskey in September, right? September is apple picking season here in the US and many parts of the world. You start drinking some of those ciders, like it just we often think of a time and place for whiskeys, and I quite often drink whiskeys out of time and place, but there really is something to be said for drinking a whiskey to match a mood, to match a season, to match food pairings like we just discussed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting in the Thrusk tasting video, we talk about it being a holiday season, right? Fires and decadent treats. This very much feels like outside on a fall day.
Oh, the palate is just so luscious. It's got such a heft to it. It is what we look for in a Ben Nevis, right? Where it just has a weight to it. And this is a time Ben Nevis has since changed, but this is a time when Ben Nevis were using a brewer's yeast
Mm.
for their fermentation, which brings forth all of these, I would argue, those peaches that you found, right? I would argue some of those appley notes that we're finding here. It's a certain fruitiness. I sometimes get like um, bruised banana peels with some Ben Nevises. I'm getting a
Mm.
little bit of that in the finish. I don't think that we brought that up in our original tasting notes, but I'm getting that now. And that's all yeast driven and
Yeah.
so unique
Yep.
that to this distillery, I think. Mm.
It's pleasingly drying as well, which is I think partly why we're talking about the cider going on here. But also, if you think about an October beer as well, and the way that might pleasingly dry the palate, like a
Mm.
crispness to it, this
Oh,
makes me want to take another sip. Right? Keep adding to the experience.
in addition to that, though, and I just got this now, like a chocolate covered apricot, right?
Mm.
Just dark chocolate, bitter chocolate.
On the palate and the finish, where are you getting that?
It's both, right? It's that beautiful, and I don't know how many people pay attention to this. I know you and I definitely do. There are certain notes that sometimes pop up in that transition from palate to finish where you tasted it as you start to swallow the liquid and then it blossoms,
Oh yeah,
right? And
oh
it
yeah,
just popped right there. Oh
yeah.
man.
That's a very interesting Ben Nevis for the first fill Oloroso Hogshead 3 year long finish on this. The fruits, the drying, a
Mhm.
little bit of the oak spice happening in there as
Mm.
well, a
Mhm.
little bit of pepper happening around
For
there.
sure. For sure.
But grain, still a wonderful grain presence to it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right. This is a great example of one of the reasons I was drawn to Ben Nevis. It's this style that
Mm,
just sort of pulls you in. It's satisfying. It's a bit enigmatic.
mm.
Like you had said, that last sip pulls you in, makes you want to have more. And that's what I find about Ben Nevis.
Well, and very quickly before we wrap up and get out of here, there's the flavometer on this, right? I
Oh
showed
yeah,
this earlier, but look at the floral, the sweet, the rich, and the nutty in there. Like
yeah,
that's a four-note combination that we're not putting out a lot of.
correct. Yeah, yeah.
That
Yep.
is that's a new experience there and well worth exploring. Buzz around Ben Nevis, excitement around Ben Nevis, rightly so. But here's a single cast nation version of it that's doing a brand new thing for us.
Yeah.
That's really
Yep.
exciting. All right.
Yeah.
Singlecastnation.com, buy a bottle, become a member, contact link out there as well. You can click on that, become a member. But it's much more fun to buy a bottle and become a member.
So just a reminder here, 11 years old, uh, 8 years in bourbon, 3 years in first fill Oloroso American oak, 56.2% alcohol, and only $120 for single cast strength. Big cherry presence, Ben Nevis. Big cherry presence without hiding Ben Nevis's character,
Yeah.
which is a hallmark of what we look for. Wonderful texture. Like you had said, Jason, singlecastnation.com. Become a member. Buy a bottle. Become a member. Already a member? Pop this in your cart. You will not regret it. So,
Cheers.
cheers.